Thank you. Corona Haka Biko. Corona Haka. Ochen the one. I make a little. Ezekemezi, I make a little. India should be Uno get through this. Uno get through. Dinner we do Bahanu law. Kahapadozin or the tradition. On your cake. Mr. and Mrs. Nicholas Amume. Because I'm going to have a high table. I'm going to learn a high table. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Opa. Okay. Opa. Okay. Okay. All right. Good. I like me, you can try last one, next one. I am a real. If I live to tell our love, where's our losing one time for ever. And I like all our eye, more pata, more so, on one voice. I am a real, never like that. Over to the Hike. Okay, that's how we try Otaranto. On look on one. You know, actually, that's a price of them. Amen. Speak of all. I am Canada Chineke. Now, Junior, a present in Iwan, you don't have a kid, and I am where. Oh, yeah, but see, Kaina told you. Echena aya tato tatuba tato ganiru tata muazo tata azu kwara onye aga ebere oya dire na anya otu a na Jesus Christ onye nwanyị amen anu me we don je ewa nje me nrulo gwa ndị otu anyị selekwe na ihe ọhụrụ ebe a anya hụgo ebe a ejere na ọhụrụ ihe m na-aghọta n'ime ya mkpụrụ ọjị na-abụọ nji ebe a na eji ala ụlọ ana m edome ịtụwe sọpọtụ ndị anyị zidere ebe ha ana m edome ha 2,000 naira maka mkpụrụ ọjị na-abụọ aji ebe a
biko kọrọ na aka otu ka aka nọ n'ebe a ana m akpọbata ibe anyị nọ ihe ahụ ike Owerri ana m akpọ otu nwanne eze bụ eze na-anọrọ ebe a otu odibo eze ka ọ bịa were otu ọjị oge ewedere eze
nọ na-abịa ruo na abụọ omen biko ana m ewere ofu mkpụrụ ọjị ewela aka igwe ọnọhịa na-ewe na ọjị dere uru ihe n'aha Jizọs
ndị maka esi eke ihe okuke biko ele ndị ashebi ahụrụ ha dị too much si ka ihe ụka ndị ashebi ọkụkọ nke mmanụ nke ebe ụlọ ya etiri m ebe ya eji tupụta ada ka ọ bịa na ọha n'ebe mba anyị ataghị ọkụkọ ka m chọrọ ịta nwanne anyị nwaanyị biko ebe ọ bụla ị nọ nke nwaanyị dịka ebe ọ bụla ndị ashebi gị anyị na-atụ anya ka ibe kere ọha na eze ozugbo na-egbughị oge Itie na pelo kone. Ya no sofrite.
This morning, many are still on the way because I know many will be coming.
Chega topala me manda mola mola. Chega topala me manda mola mola. Chega topala me manda mola mola. Sana dingi dingi. Chega topala me manda mola mola. Chega topala me manda mola mola. Anda dingi dingi. Chega topala me manda mola mola. Sana dingi dingi. Ego dingi mola mola. Shoto mata kimana. mmadụ nọkwa ebe a enwere nwaanyị nwe mmemme a nwaanyị ọtụtụ ha anyị ga-akpọbata Ezinne Emilia ka ọ bịa kelee ọha na eze n'ụzọ niile bụ ụzọ dara ụda. Ezinne Emilia, biko ebe ọ bụla ọ nọ unu nyere m theater information.
I will never forget you this one.
Listen up. Hello. Thank you. Because of what? Nke nwoke ga-apụta wada n'ịnọ. Dịka nke nwoke na-abịa were ọnọdụ. Nke nwaanyị ga-akwado na-aga ebe a ga-akụnye ya mmanya ma o gosi ya onye wudi ya. Ndị egwu unu ga-akụ egwu anyị ga-eji nabata nke nwoke ka ọ bịa were oche. Yes, music. Egwu ndị ichie. Okay, excuse me. Buko, okay, so tag it, okay, what are you here? Okay, madam, You know what? no one. I should be going to push in the one. I don't like to go like whatever I'm going to say here. He said, yes. And one of my gentlemen, you are man, you are welcome, sir. You are welcome, go. You are highly welcome. Yeah. Yes. Go for the guys. Because no one has anything no more. Hello. Mommy, that's enough. Come on, yeah, hold it. The way back. Problem why you go for because don't know that the man on the bed from there you come out everything will rise up. Why I can't be to go to now engineer Ogwibe the small I make it all Madi said Adama or master or Mr. Emeka Maduka became popular in law. na ọbụla o mekus dịka ebe ọbụla na anyị na-atụ anya gị ozugbo ozugbo dịka anyị ga na-atụ anya Emeka ọ nọzikwa ebe a on the way ngwa onye ọzọ ana m akpọ brọda Chikezie Okoronkwo biko nwanne nwaanyị si abịa sara ya oche Chikezie Okoronkwo na-ebizikwa ezigbo ndụ n'obodo unu ọbara ka ọ bịa sara nwanne anyị nwaanyị oche ka mara ma o nwekwara mmadụ ebe ịkpọchi nke ụmụ nwaanyị ụmụnne gị ọha na be ihe ọha chere kwe ma ọ mmiri achọrọ m ife mere ngwa achọrọ m ka m nwee challenge from Ihite Owerri ngwa number 1 bịa this way watch me my sister lee m anya n'ihu ịma na onye ọbụla nwere onye nwere ihe ịma na onye otu o si efu okwu ngwa number 1 ngwa tụọ ya ka nkụ ya otu o ga-esi tụọ ya n'ala tụọ n'ala bịa ngwa machia ya ngwa soro machi ma ya na-amachi ya gawa this way anyị achọ ya achọ na-adịghị eji achọkwa m ka erepụ dị mọnụ ka ọ sị kwụwa m ụgwọ ga-ejikọcha akwụ m ụgwọ na-aga na-ele na anya otu esi echi ego ọ bụrụ onye pụtara onye eso mmadụ ego n'ihu yes nga ka ego n'ejedemere ihe eji ama na mmadụ na-ebi ezi ndụ n'obodo ya onye ka m na-ahụ ọnwa Chief Emmanuel Olisakwe ọnwa nke mbụ n'ala Ihite Owerri ọnwa anyị na-anabata gị ngwa achọrọ m ka ndị ihe ọma gbaa nwa agba mgbasi ụzọ ibe atụrụ ya na-abịa si otu atụrụ ya gawa ọnwa na-aga sobu ya makwasị iwu princess yes ọnwa atụrụ ya gawa biko ọ ya nọdụ ebe a by my side thank you nwanne tụrụ ya gaba achọrọ ka ọ pụọ ama ka ndị obodo anyị gbaa ya agba na-aga na-esi ya hello ụmụ nwaanyị ndị na-alụ nwaanyị ibe gị na-akpachi na oke ọha so ọgụgụ ọgbụrụ na hello nna biko ụlọ ntụrụ kpọrọsi nwa akpọrọ ka ebe ụlọ ụbọchị eji ụlọ ntụrụ gwa igwe yes olu ole na omume mba hapụ ya ịba n'ọdụ achị n'azụ yes na-aga chechi ego yes onye ka m na-ahụ ihe onye nke m mba na onye nke chọrọ inye m bụ by the side pocket all even got on my own. I'll come spray up only but by the side. I manage as a management, madam. Yeah, a lady name ego. Yes, ndị obodo na-ahụ na. Yes. Otu aka ọ dị. Ngwa, about on. Watch me now. This way. This way. Yeah. Yes. Ngwa kwenye baya. Elali baya. Come on. Cheme. Ngwa tutu one ego. Lese n'ụzọ biko ebe ọbụla na anyị na-atụ anya gị ugbu a dịka ndị na-ere eke nwanne m nwoke ịma ihe mere gị adị m ama m ị na-ede ezigbo omume ibe nke anyị ma kemgbe onye ọbụla agbara bụsi onye ọbụla chọmasị ewu ehe ozi onye ọnwụ ibe ya
ana m akpọ ụmụnne m ahụ m ha ego ga-abụ ya ya anya taa ihe mere bụ onye ọbụla si n'obi pụta asụ ndị agha abụ ya anya ha pụta n'ọba gosi ka ajụ egwu isi
hello ọba ụlọ nụrụ ihe nwanne m nwoke kwuru ọ si enwe ha onye a ga-agba aha na ya chọrọ ka onye ọbụla hụrụ ya n'anya ndị niile kwuru ebe nga taa bịa shio apụsisi n'ebe ọ nọ onye ọbụla n'ebe ọbụla ọ nọ ọ bụrụ na ụlọ si nwanne anyị nwoke kwụrụ n'ọgbọ ọwụ na ụnụ si ahụ bịa nọdụkwa na ọ ya ewerekwa oche ka anyị gositele mmasị aha ego apụtala ihe ọ ka ọ dị ego dị mma ịpụta
onye ọbụla nọ n'ụwa kwesịrị ime without money nothing like life. Ndị ji ego siri ike. Ọsọ Chizọba, tell that Chizọba na onye nke ọgwụ otu. Ijirekwa lesi aka pick up nke a mere bụ na-enwe a na-akọ ụlọ ị chọrọ.
Ọ ga-ekwu okwu.
Ngwa Chizọba ngwa. Chizọba bilie ndị be anyị na-eyi Chizọba ngwa moto ebilie nọmba 1 pịam ngwa Somije biko hapụrụ m aka ọhụrụ na ọrụ hapụrụ m
Onye na-eme obodo ọla afọ ya
ịma ihe chere eji
Manchester onye na-eme maka afọ ya
ọnụ ochie Chizọba
ele afọ ya
nwanne Chizọba otu nne
ele afọ ya
oke
Mekus mesi na gị na emere ka emere brọda dị ya mma
Atlanta Chizọba oke ebe ọzọ Chizọba ka ele
Ọhanyelugo ihe ọma
Ọhanyelugo
nwanne mmadụ onyelugo jibinu asị na onye nnukwu nwere ife na-eme Ọhanyelugo ihe ọma ka isi eje nọ esegide ndị mmadụ gị kabiri n'obodo nwanyị Emeka Ina wonye kuwane no sekele wanyamana Nisuku na ye bakala bakale lone na lene nage Na ye gebi nobono Na ye geri kono kono Isokele wanyamana Chizọba Isi Ọhanyelugo Wujamane Ezi na mbọchị Ọhanyelugo
please
asị m kwubenụ asị m ka ihe ji His Royal Highness maka na eze kwesịrị gị asị m na nnukwu nwere asọ ezi okiri nye mmadụ gị biko
Chairman Ayaka from Madinato, young boys upon Bank, give me number from Aloe. I will be one now, I am
maintenance in no, baby maintenance in
watch that this way.
Dr. Raja Namabo. Dr. Raja.
Dr. Raja, one man, Oyoma.
What's that called?
Chizola.
Hey, when you come now,
Get in here, I got one. Get it, listen. Get in here, oh, what's that? Why am I? Okay, Imam. Go. Okay, my okay. Oh, okay, go. Magaleti. Yeah, Imam never work at this. Okay, somebody. Now, why am I better manner? Oh, why am I better winner?
What is that? I'm not burying my own. My brother.
Chizoba. Because I'm going to have to do it. Say, Philip, go just start on what I'm doing.
Shalom. Hey, you don't.
If I don't think about it, you're not. Now what? Oh, what is that bottom more here? Madonna's grabber. Bottom water, boy, I want to some pretty go with Book of watch channel here, watch here. Oh, one. But then I can have yeah, I know. That's very good. Nadala. Emeka. Getting here, which getting in at that when I'm up on it, I'm going to make up on Koyo. Okay, I saw him. No, you become my one. We won't go ahead and carry. But the same thing is here, maybe I'm probably going to let that hand. What about you? Yeah, no, the guy, they got my father once. They do for kill women. Okay, when I'm whining, why, my mother down on Hannah, I did double. Ngwa bushi ngwa nye mmiri go we rugbo e bla watch ya wanna ya ori aka akade Emeka ba bere no buko bia so ngwa kita oyo bula nwere nda ihe dina nwe na kita bo here oyo bula nwere ihe dina nwe na Thank
I think we are leaving by 11 o'clock, if I'm right. 11 o'clock we have to clear up. Just finally, I would like to thank everybody for being here. May God bless you. Thank you very much. God bless you all. Amen. God is good. God has been back for St. John's Community Hall. There's a party going on here tonight. You're welcome.
Mama. For some, the Queen Mother is an enduring symbol of regal grace and feminine charm. Others, like Princess Diana, detected a more forceful character.
I think Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, is the original English steel magnolia. Perhaps we could translate it out of Southern States American. She's an English rose inside a steel spectacle case. You don't live until you're 99 unless you're tough.
I think she's got a core of steel. I think that she is a woman who is very conscious of what she's able to do. She is very feminine in some ways. She is almost a flirt, almost a tease, and I think she's been that all her life.
As Duchess of York, Queen Consort and Queen Mother, the former Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon has spent most of her adult life in royal duty. Ever gracious and always smiling, she's created a unique rapport with the public. Despite being as old as the century, she has refused to retire. What is the secret of her vivacity?
She actually enjoys life. She takes huge pleasure in relatively little things. She loves horse racing. She loves gardens. She obviously loves clothes. She's not unfashionable. She's not old-fashioned. She transcends fashion. Like another Queen Elizabeth, the greatest, the first. She's got a motto. The motto of Queen Elizabeth I was, if I dare use Latin, semper et adem, always the same. And I think, really, it could be the motto of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother.
When Elizabeth was born in 1900, Queen Victoria was the reigning monarch. The Queen died the following year. Edward VII took the throne with his beautiful Queen Alexandra. In 1910, their son became King George V. He was king during World War I. He changed the royal family's Germanic name, Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, to the House of Windsor. St Paul's, Waldenbury, was one of several houses of the Earl and Countess of Strathmore, the Bowes-Lyon family. It was the earliest home of their 9th child, Elizabeth Angela Marguerite. Their first daughter had died, and their new little girl, with her appealing looks and gentle manner, was especially adored.
She was very close to her mother, and I think perhaps she was a bit spoiled because she was a very charming child, and all the servants adored her. She used to go into the kitchen and beg for extra jellies and cream and things like that. I think because of her great charm, she could get away with anything.
Glamis Castle in Scotland, with its secret rooms and ancient ghosts, was another Strathmore home. Every summer, Elizabeth's family gathered here, holding shooting parties. They had afternoon tea in the Great Hall, a treat for Elizabeth and her younger brother David.
The Bowes-Lyons were a very old family, going back to God knows whom in Scotland, and they were also very rich. They'd come into money rather fortunately, as well as having a lot of land. And they owned several castles, a huge house in St James's Square in London.
Interestingly enough, they weren't terribly impressed by the royal family. Her father didn't really think much of the royal family. So at the time that there were thoughts that she might marry into the royal family, he wasn't especially impressed by that because they were really aristocrats in their own right and had come down. They were descended from King Bruce of the Scots and so on. So really very, very grand family.
World War I broke out in August 1914 on Elizabeth's 14th birthday. She helped to nurse wounded soldiers sent to recover at Glamis. Later, she wrote to one of them, "Dear Harding, thank you so much for your letter. I am sorry that you can't find a job. It seems to be very difficult now." Elizabeth became one of the most eligible girls of her time.
She was very petite and small, and she had a pretty heart-shaped face, and beautiful blue eyes, and a lovely complexion, and dark hair, which she wore in a rather old-fashioned way for those days with a fringe. But she had this sort of radiant attraction. She had this great power even then of making people feel that she was concentrating on them, that she was only interested in them, which is one of the most attractive qualities you can have.
King George V and Queen Mary were enchanted by Elizabeth. Their own children had been strictly brought up, creating personality problems. Bertie, their second son, was very shy. David, the Prince of Wales, was more rebellious. He met Elizabeth and liked her, but they never fell in love. Even then, he preferred more sophisticated women. It was Bertie who fell for Elizabeth's exceptional charms.
She was really the centre of masculine attention. A lot of men were in love with her. She was a great Deb in her day. When he met her, he fell in love with her absolutely instantly. And he was, with all his failings, because he was a very diffident, very shy, very reserved man, but he was always a very determined man. And once having fallen in love with her, he was determined to marry her. So he asked her 3 times, and for the first 2 occasions she refused. She didn't really want to be caught in this kind of royal cage. She was a woman who was used to her independence. She didn't really want to lead the restricted kind of life which marrying into the royal family would mean. But he was very persistent, the Duke of York, and he simply kept at her and kept at her and kept at her. And in the end, she agreed.
She really loved him. He had a very vulnerable quality, which is very appealing to some women. And he did really need her. And then he was physically attractive. He had a very good figure. He danced very well. He was very athletic. He dressed very well. And he was really a good guy.
On April the 26th, 1923, Elizabeth set out for her wedding at Westminster Abbey. It was the first royal wedding of the century. Elizabeth was now Her Royal Highness the Duchess of York. For over a decade, she would be the King and Queen's only daughter-in-law, adored by her husband and cherished by his family. The Yorks became the focus of public attention.
It was really a very popular marriage because the Prince of Wales, his brother, wasn't married at the time. So there was rather pressure really on the Duke of York to marry. So when they married, it was a great public occasion. The public were very taken with it because she was very, very beautiful. He was a good-looking man. It was a kind of romantic wedding and very, very popular.
The Duke and Duchess were the rising stars of the new House of Windsor. Elizabeth, known as the Smiling Duchess, was her husband's mainstay.
She was so good for Bertie. She brought him out, she supported him, she made his life fun, she made everything go around him. And I suppose they must have been a bit worried because he'd had a history of bad health, because he stammered and was very shy. And so nobody could have been more ideal than she was for him.
Queen Mary formed a close bond with her son's wife, now the mother of Princess Elizabeth, born on April the 21st, 1926. The Duchess gave birth to a second daughter, Princess Margaret Rose. In August 1930, the King and Queen were delighted with the little princesses. Marriage transformed Bertie's life. Most of all, Elizabeth gave him the stability of a happy home and a precious family.
In private, they say that he was a man who could be quite easy, quite amusing, quite at ease with himself in private. But in public, he had none of this. She was exactly the opposite. She had all the strengths where he had the weaknesses. And as she wasn't in any way a domineering woman, she wasn't in any way a hard woman, she knew exactly how to handle him. She knew exactly how to bring out his strengths. So they were very, very good together. It was a very, very successful marriage. He said many years later when Queen Elizabeth, when his daughter Elizabeth married Prince Philip, he said, "Your mother is the most wonderful woman in the world." And I think this is perfectly true. They were a devoted couple.
Bertie referred to his family as us four. Their main role was to support his aging parents in their duties, especially in the absence of the Prince of Wales, who had other interests. David, the Prince of Wales, had drifted a long way from his highly moral family. So far, his affairs with married women had remained hidden from public view.
The Prince of Wales liked married women. He liked bossy women. He liked women who, in a way, could order him about.
He fell for an American divorcee, still married to her second husband. Mrs. Wallis Simpson was scorned by Elizabeth.
I don't think she approved of Mrs. Wallis Simpson at all. In fact, I don't think she ever really liked her. She was perfectly happy about some of the Prince of Wales's mistresses, like Thelma, Lady Furness, who was an American divorcee. She was perfectly happy with her. But there was something about Wallis that she didn't like, and I think she did not like the way that Wallis took over David's life entirely and separated him from his brothers.
While George V lived, the issue of David's love life was avoided, but at 70 the king's health was fading. On January the 20th, 1936, the king was dying.
Following bulletin was issued at 9:25. The king's life is moving peacefully towards its close.
George V's funeral was solemn and dignified. Britain said farewell to a much-respected monarch who had held firm in a war fought against his own cousin, the German Kaiser. The king's legacy of duty, above all else, fell to David, now King Edward VIII.
Our late sovereign lord, King George V, of blessed and glorious memory, that the high and mighty Prince Edward, Albert, Christian, George, Andrew, Patrick, David, is now become our only lawful king by the grace of God of Great Britain, Ireland, and the British dominions beyond the seas, defender of the faith, Emperor of India. God save the King.
Elizabeth avoided the new king's mistress.
There was a story about one occasion when he had then become king. He was then King Edward VIII and gave a dinner party at Balmoral to which the Duke and Duchess of York, as they then were invited. And Wallis Simpson behaved like the hostess. She came forward to meet the Yorks to welcome them to Balmoral. And the Duchess of York had nothing to do with it. She simply walked past her and said, "I've come to have dinner with a king," and simply walked past Wallis Simpson, absolutely ignored her. Never liked her at all.
Outwardly, Edward VIII followed his father's traditions. He kept up the ceremonial side of his role, but he was a king in conflict with his government, church and family. His love for Wallis, now twice divorced, caused a constitutional crisis. After the Bishop of Norwich spoke out, the king abdicated.
You all know the reasons which have impelled me to renounce the throne. But you must believe me when I tell you that I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king as I would wish to do without the help and support of the woman I love.
Now in virtual exile, the former king married his mistress in France in June 1937. They were given the titles Duke and Duchess of Windsor, but Wallis was denied the prefix Her Royal Highness by the new monarch. This was the source of lasting animosity with Bertie and Elizabeth, now the king and queen, roles they had never expected.
From the start, when the Prince of Wales wasn't married and got older and older and still wasn't married, there was always a thought that her husband, that the Duke of York, might become king. So there was a thought in the back of her mind, but even so, it came as a great shock when actually when the abdication happened and they were called upon to be king and queen.
On December the 11th, 1936, Bertie chose the name King George VI to stress continuity with his deceased father and to distance himself from his abdicated brother. Elizabeth was ill in bed. She said, "I'm afraid there are going to be great changes in our lives. We must take what is coming to us and make the best of it." The coronation took place on the 12th of May, 1937. To the King and Queen, the ceremony was a sacrament. they vowed to God and their country a pledge of lifelong duty. Elizabeth sensed that a difficult time lay ahead.
She knew her husband very well. She knew his frailties. She knew that he was terribly shy, that he had, in fact, crowd phobia. He really didn't like that. And so she could see the enormous burden that would be placed on this not very strong man.
Foreign tours added the burden of international scrutiny, but the king knew that his wife's extraordinary charm would smooth the way. In June 1938, they were due to make a state visit to France when the Queen heard that her mother, the Countess of Strathmore, had died. With Europe on the brink of war, they knew the importance of cementing relations with France. The royal couple bravely continued their plans.
They decided not to cancel the tour, but it went ahead. And Norman Hartnell worked through all his reference books and thought, first of all, oh, we have to make everything in black. And then he decided, no, he found that white was a mourning colour for the royal family as well. So he made the entire wardrobe, everything was copied in white. She absolutely swept the press off their feet. The French adored her, and she looked so glamorous. It's probably the most striking royal tour that's ever happened anywhere.
The king changed. His wife and their family gave him the warmth and comfort he had not known as a child. The little princesses he adored grew up into attractive young women. Their mother was their role model. She was very close to her daughters, giving them both guidance and practical knowledge.
The family life of Elizabeth and Margaret, or was of course known as Mary Rose, seems to have been as near idyllic as it was possible to be. Their father was incredibly soft, tender, indulgent, particularly with the younger daughter, with Princess Margaret. Their mother, in many ways, seems to have been, by the standards of the 20s or 30s, almost more of a friend to them than either a formal mother. The Queen, our present Queen Elizabeth, and Princess Margaret. The one thing they can't blame their problems on is their own unhappy childhoods, because they weren't.
In 1937, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor upset the royal family and the British government by visiting Hitler in Germany. In June 1939, the King and Queen visited the White House and the US President Franklin Roosevelt. On this trip, they won a crucial ally for Britain. They also visited Canada, showing unity in the threat of war, which was only months away. The King had grown into his role, and the Queen had a genius for publicity. They had risen to the task, but the real test lay ahead. Meanwhile, in Cannes and other resorts on the Côte d'Azur, the show went on for the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, now regarded with suspicion.
They did think at the time that there might be something treasonable in them, because during the war, at the beginning of the war, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor they'd paid a visit to Nazi Germany, they'd been seen together with Hitler, and there was this theory that if Britain lost the war, that Hitler might put the Duke and Duchess of Windsor on the throne, and the royal family took this very, very seriously indeed.
Europe's social attractions were interrupted in 1940, when the Duke and Duchess of Windsor were sent to the Bahamas, where the Duke spent the war as governor. Queen Elizabeth regarded Wallis Simpson as unfit even to be a governor's wife, but at least they were out of the way. War brought separations. Men went to fight, and children were evacuated from the cities. Everyone looked to the royal family for morale and leadership. In 1940, Buckingham Palace suffered a direct hit. Queen Mary had been sent to Badminton, a safe house. Elizabeth wrote to her, "My darling Mamma, I hardly know how to begin to tell you of the horrible attack on Buckingham Palace this morning. Bertie and I arrived there at 11:15, and he and I went up to our poor windowless rooms. While the king believed that victory would come, the strain of the war took its toll on him. He was a heavy smoker.
I don't think she tried to stop him smoking very much, and I don't think she realized probably how bad it was for him. When it came to the drinking didn't affect his daily life, it didn't affect his work. He used to like a good hearty swig out of the whiskey decanter in the evening, particularly at regimental dinners. When it came to his fits of temper, she was one of the few people who could calm him.
Whenever he was in a temper, they say that she would teasingly take his pulse and go tick, 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 just to make him laugh at himself. He took himself very seriously. He took everything extremely seriously. She's got a more buoyant nature. She tends to throw things off. So they complement each other wonderfully well. Where he was short-tempered, she really was kind of as calm as the day was long. She's a very easy woman, I think, to live with, and this is exactly the kind of person he needed. He was a tremendous warrior. She's a woman who simply had a way of casting off her worries, a very equitable temperament.
The Queen set an example to the people in every area of public life. Hitler regarded her as the most dangerous woman in Europe.
He felt that she had the king, by then King George VI, under her thumb. He thought that she was, as indeed she was, a very strong-minded woman, and that her husband, King George VI, was a rather weak-minded man. And so Hitler was very